And before we start today's meeting, I'd like to say a few words about the late Doug Hayes, who sadly passed away recently. Doug was a co-opted member of the committee, and Doug Hayes was a councillor for St Oswald's ward for 24 years, over 2 periods. He was made mayor of Hyndburn in 2000-2001, and his wife Sandra Hayes was his mayoress. And Doug served for many years as the chair of this committee, and more recently returned to provide support to the committee as a non-elected co-optee. He became an honorary alderman in 2015. Our thoughts go out with his wife Sandra and family at this time. It's a really sad time. You know, Doug obviously been here when I've been on this committee, and he's always had very good pertinent questions. So he's very, very good. So sad. So we'll go on to the first item on the agenda. Apologies for absences, substitutions, declarations of interest, and dispensations. Anybody? Yes, please.
Apologies for number 12.
Thank you. And you're subbing, yeah? Any other substitutes? No. That's it. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Ben, have you got any? Yes, Stacey, please go ahead.
I'm only a co-optee and I don't have a vote, but I just thought I'd just let you know that, in all transparency, that when you're looking through some of these potential grant offers, that I am on a couple of these committees for them, but just to let you know that.
Thank you. As you said, you haven't got voting rights.
No.
So thank you for that. Item 2, minutes of the last meeting, and this is to submit the minutes of the resources overview and scrutiny committee meetings on the 12th of December 2003 and the 9th of January 2024. I move the minutes as outlined. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tessel. All those in favour? Against, if any? No? Okay, perfect. So, item 3. This is the call-in procedure note. This is to advise the committee of the procedure to be followed at the meeting in relation to call-ins. Attention is drawn to point 8 of the procedure. I'll ask Ben now to talk briefly on the procedure before we move on to item 4.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, as always, when we have a calling meeting, the procedure note is included in the agenda pack. That's on page 15. So this determines the settling in order. The Chair will invite the sponsor of the call-in and portfolio holders to speak at the appropriate time. Members of the committee will then have the opportunity to ask questions of the sponsor of the call-in and of the portfolio holder. They will then be asked to sum up, and then the committee must decide whether it wishes to release the decision or refer it back to Cabinet. The 3 options of the committee are outlined at point 8. That's on page 15, point 8 and page 15. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ben. Okay, item number 4, the call-in of Cabinet decision, Community Chess Grant Award. At its meeting on the 24th of January, agenda item 19, minute number 294, Cabinet resolved the following. That Cabinet, number 1, rescinds the decision made at its meeting of the 18th of October 2023 to allocate an equal amount of the Community Chess Fund to each of the borough's 16 wards. 2, approves the proposed list of community chess grants attached at Appendix A of the report, which can be seen on pages 30 to 43 of this agenda pack. In accordance with the call-in procedure for Cabinet decisions, the procedure has been activated. The following documents are included in the agenda for the convenience of members. The call-in form, copy of the Cabinet report from the 24th of January 2024, Community Chess Grant Awards, copy of appendix to above Cabinet report, and an extract from minutes of Cabinet on the 24th of January 2024, minute number 294. Following the call-in procedure that Ben described in item 3, I'd like to invite now Councillors Mike Booth and Councillor Scott Brereton, sponsors of the call-in, to explain their reasons for the call-in. Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to make it clear that there is no intention to overturn any of the decisions that were made by this is an opportunity as a scrutiny committee to learn from perhaps some of the mistakes that were made when this was set up. Obviously, there came a point when the committee had to decide that the way it had been set up was not going to work. And I would like to know, first of all, what the priorities were when it was initially set up.
Would you like to respond, Councillor Richter?
Yes, but I'd like us to take a...
Yeah, please, yeah, as I say, I'll now invite you to respond to any issue, right?
Yes.
Are you finished? Sorry, Captain. That's it, thank you.
Can I please address, get you to look at page 27 of the agenda and address point 3.3. It became apparent from the applications we received, and it was the view of the working group, that the original intention to allocate the grant on the basis of 5,000 per ward was misguided. The reason that this conclusion was reached was that for the most part the organisations that made applications do not run on ward lines and instead offer facilities and services to beneficiaries that are much more rooted in communities of interest. Put simply, the types of organisations that apply for funding, e.g. cricket and boxing clubs, drama clubs, the Hyndham Green Spaces Forum, Sea Cadets, Scout groups, etc., are open to residents across the borough and do not define themselves in terms of the council's electoral divisions. So let's just pick out three examples. Great Arwood Agricultural Society received a grant for £900. Every spring bank holiday they put on the agricultural show, and that is enjoyed by people throughout Hyndham. In fact, you know, people throughout Lancashire really. Friends of Riddings Park, who we gave £1,000 to. That benefits, you know, it's just a short distance from the Spring Hill ward, and it benefits all in Oswald whistles. So all people make use of that park. Accrington Rotary, for instance, they, you know, produce carnivals at every 2 years, and people from all over Hyndham attend. So what you can see is that organisations do not work on an electoral boundaries. We were very open about it, and the decisions we made we are proud of. We have been asked what basis for our recommendations are. We invited organisations to make bids. We looked carefully through those bids, and we exercised our judgment to reflect the fabulous work our community groups do across the board. I want to emphasise this point. This money is going to community organisations that are the lifeblood of this borough and are supporting residents and activities throughout Hyndham. That will bring me to my final point. Delaying or withdrawing this funding from local community organisations has real world consequences which councillors should consider. I've been told of the situation at Accrington Cricket Club by our Member of Parliament, where they are going to use the community chess funding towards a wider grant for new practice facilities. The uncertainty they have now faced over the grant we're proposing to provide them, which will benefit players young and old, means that the deadline for that application is now fast approaching, and they are not sure they will be able to submit that application in time. That is potentially 85 junior and 50 senior players, all residents here in Hindburn, negatively impacted by this decision to call this in. I urge councillors to keep this in mind and free these much needed resources within to the community.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Brickwood. There's a few questions I have that we have prepared already for the committee, and obviously, as usual, I will open it to any committee members to speak. So the first question was, who was involved in the Cabinet Working Group to evaluate the bids, and what criteria were used to make the decision on successful bids?
Well, as I've said to you, we looked very carefully at these bids. In fact, it took 3 days to actually sort them out in total. Councillor Smithson and myself were involved, and we looked, as I say, we looked at every bid, and then we carefully made our judgments.
Thank you very much. Second question, will the community chest be repeated again next year? Will it be repeated next year? Is it a one-off?
At this stage, I really couldn't answer that question. I think it depends. If we have a Conservative administration, yes. If we have a Labour administration, I suspect no.
Okay, leave it there. Question number 3. This is to the calling officers, councillors that called it in. Do you have any suggestions of how you would have allocated funds differently?
Well, this was the reason why we called it in. So the process, the mistakes that we made and the things that have gone well, so that's the whole point of the call. We've already made it clear that we don't want any of the allocated monies to be redistributed or clawed back or anything like that. The call is simply about learning from what went wrong, what went well, and you know, and that's it, quite simply. It's a learning process.
Thank you. That's the end of the pre-prepared questions, and I'll open it to all committee members. Councillor Plummer?
Thank you. Right, Hindburn Labour have called in the community chest grants. In their opinion, we should revert back to the £5,000 per award. However, Barnfield, Clayton Moors and Overton have received between them £23,500. Should the community chest grants revert back to the £5,000 per award, as proposed by Hindburn Labour, who will have the unfortunate task of deciding which organisations who have been promised funding will get it, and who will tell the people who are not getting the funding and have been promised it, because in my opinion it should be the Labour councillors in those wards.
Sorry, Councillor Plummer, so you missed the very first part. They don't want it rescinded.
Sorry?
They don't want it rescinded.
No.
No, they don't want it rescinded.
No, I know. Oh, do they not?
So why is it
What we've done, quite simply, pulled it in
watered it down.
to understand how the process was changed during how the decision to move from ward based to how it's currently being done. We understand that the money's already been promised to the community organisations. We have no problem with that whatsoever. That's absolutely fine. We just want to learn from what's gone on through this process. Should this be repeated again next year? Quite simply.
Thank you.
A question for you, Councillor Brickwood. Could county councillors choose to support these community chest applications if they wanted to in their own wards?
Yeah, I mean, county councillors have £2,000 allocated to them every year, and if they wish to support some of the bids that failed, they could choose to support them. And I would point out that we have, where bids have failed, we have tried to point them into the right direction. So some of them have been supported from the leader's budget, and some we've directed to prospects, and some we've directed to the Lancashire Environmental Fund. So it isn't as, you know, we have supported some 50 organisations, and I think that we should be complimented and not criticised for that.
Thank you. Yes, okay. Yeah, on the back of that, as the Councillor for Uncourt, I'd like to welcome the funding that obviously we got for the Uncourt Forum, and thank you for that allocation. As an ex-officer of the Army Cadet Force for over 22 years, I do appreciate what you said earlier on in your statement, that the Sea Cadets are drawn throughout the borough, and I just wanted to emphasise that because the Air Cadets, the Sea Cadets and the Army Cadets are all drawn from out of the borough. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, we were delighted to be able to support Anglian Sea Cadets. They might be based in Oswald Twistle, as they currently are, but they do draw young people from throughout the borough, as we know, and obviously they put on a wonderful night when it's Trafalgar night, the Trafalgar night dinner, and in fact are active throughout the community.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poppins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, it's glad to hear that the Labour councillors at this meeting have had a road to Damascus change, because reading the Accrington Observer and other press, but that's probably from their leader of their group, and another councillor always seems to be wanting to be in the paper but now seems to be hiding from the press. All I can say, Councillor Brickliffe has outlined the reason for the clearly sensible approach taken. You cannot allocate 5,000 per ward. All the community groups go over ward boundaries. It's not Tron, you're not liquidated if you're not in that borough, and it was just a sensible approach. All we've had is political posturing in the paper to try and get an headline. Well, they've got an headline currently, but they're in hiding from it.
I would remind that this is a cross-party. We're here to scrutinise, okay? So,
I've been on this council now about 15 years. We used to have something called the Judicial Committee External Funding, which was supposed to decide on if local groups wanted to apply. But because we had no money to give out, I think it was disbanded many years ago. And the council has always given the grant to the Citizens Advisory Board, without which it wouldn't be able to function, but not to individual groups. And when Councillor Brickliffe said who these failed bidders, shall we say, have been referred to, I always refer people to the CVS, Community and Voluntary Service, on which I'm an independent trustee, because members of the public and local organisations always assume that the council will give grants to small local voluntary and charitable organisations, and I say, well, actually they don't. But if you approach the CVS, who are based in Great Hall currently, it's Hanging and Ribble Valley, it's very likely that they might be able to find you something. When I was on the board at Careslink a number of years ago, I used to meet a Ribble Valley councillor, and she explained to me that at Ribble Valley, the local groups, every year there was a setup where local groups could bid, and it was a cross-party panel, I think, of 4 councillors that used to consider these bids every year from local groups, and if they had something one year, they wouldn't get it the next, etc. So, you know, it's going through my mind, is this something that we should try to put on a more systematic, regular footing, if we have the money, you know, to try and support our charitable and voluntary organisations, rather than just having a one-off every so often. I don't know whether that's something that would be feasible.
we'll ask Councillor Brickliffe. Not now. You don't have to answer now if you want to.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else would like to make any comments? Sorry, I keep forgetting him. Sorry, because you're on my right, I think.
Yeah. I'd like to know when the decision was made to rescind the arrangement on the 18th of October, if the people who had bid for these grants were informed that changed and that they could reframe their bids in order to fulfil the new criteria.
I think it was only when we met and we looked at the bids for the first time that we'd actually realised that this didn't fit into nice particular ward parcels. But I think the most important thing is what we looked at was if the benefits of those grants were spread through the community, and I think that is what we were trying to achieve, and we did achieve. I mean, I don't understand why this has been called in, because it's just really delayed these grants being paid to the local community. And as I pointed out earlier, Accrington Cricket Club, who have to prove when they're going in for a bigger grant, but they need to prove that they have the support of the council in making that application. So really, what this calling has done is meant that we've dithered and delayed, and also these organisations have been actually worried that they weren't going to get the funding that was promised to them.
Yes, please.
I'm still struggling with this, the background to this, with the priorities that must have been in mind when this was set up. There are things that need attention in this borough, and you're looking for how effective this £80,000 is going to be. Will you be monitoring the results of these allocations?
I think yes, we could monitor the results of these applications, but what I am most pleased about is the fact that it will benefit so many people and over 50 organisations in Hindburn, and I think that we as a council should all be proud of and not be critical of.
Yes, please.
I'm struggling a little bit. So was there a clear priority as to what good you wanted to be done? Was there a clear criteria
Yes.
as to what people were applying for and what they had to meet to get the money? And then was there ever an expected outcome assigned to that? And then how was that decided? And then after the applications, how was it decided to change the things? Was there an actual clear methodologies to an end goal? Because it just seems that people have been invited to apply, and then once all the applications were in, it was reviewed as to what's kind of the best based on personal judgment.
I think I know you might be struggling, but I can't over-explain that organisations do not fall nicely into little ward pockets. And I think unless you can grasp that concept, that
No,
you
that-
will.
that's
No, don't interrupt. I didn't interrupt you. You will struggle with that. But the thing about it is, one of the things that was a very high priority was to look at organisations who engage young people, because young people left to their own devices can often be problematic. So we looked at organisations who would help the young. We looked at organisations that would benefit older people. And I think those were two of the main priorities. So for instance, we gave an award of I think 4,700 we gave 2,000 to Clayton Boxing Club that helps keep youngsters off the street. But unless you grasp this concept that these organisations don't fall into little neat ward boundaries, you will continue to struggle.
Mr. McLeish.
So how come that concept wasn't grasped in June when this was set up? Because that's abundantly clear, as Mr Parkinson said. It was common sense that many of the things that are good in the community go across ward lines.
Yeah, and as I said, I don't think it was realised until we got the applications. But it made little difference whether or not it had been realised in June, you know, because at that stage no grants had been provided to anyone. So it didn't it wasn't of, it was of very little consequence that hadn't been grasped.
Councillor Brereton.
Oh, yeah. I think when you said earlier, Councillor Brickland, about the awards could be monitored, I think they should be monitored, really, because this is, I mean, I will applaud money going into community groups all day long, but I think there has to be some sort of monitoring process just for transparency and clarity from a taxpayer's purpose, and also to see, you know, should this run next year, you have evidence then, has that project worked, do they deserve even more money next year, and you have that evidence then. Currently, if we're not monitoring it as a council, then that surely can't happen. So yeah, that's just a point really, I think.
I just got, sorry, Mr Parkinson, and then
I just
sorry, you want to...
I would just like to respond that it's the prudent financial management of this council that has enabled us to give to put these monies into a community chest. And can I almost ask a rhetorical question? How much did the Labour Control Council ever give to organisations? I don't think, you know, there was no such thing. So so the Sea Cadets, organisations in Hindman haven't benefited from the years of Labour control that there was.
If I could bring in...
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I mean, the likelihood is the scheme, we've had some input from officers, and they probably looked at the county scheme where it is 2,000 per county division. County divisions are a lot larger. The issue regarding this scheme has been outlined, and the problems with doing something similar in the district, because wards are so small, and actually the organisations spread outside that. They don't go by ward boundaries, they go by townships, and some even larger than that. The issue of checking these amounts of money becomes a bureaucratic nightmare. You're going to pay someone £20 an hour to check these small amounts of money to local organisations. Now, of course, Accrington Stanley Community Trust and Accrington Cricket Club, because they have paid employees, can do a nice report and spend hours on it. But that is for a small amount of money. I mean, when I was leader of the council, I sat round a table with the Accrington District Poor Fund. There was about 14 officers round it, and we were giving money to the poorest in society for a second-hand fridge or a cooker, which cost £50. It took us about an hour and a half to make a decision. It cost probably £600 or £700 in officer time to give a £50 grant. That is not the way forward. Of course, when it's large amounts of money, of course it needs to be inspected and done due diligence. And I'm sure Accrington Stanley and the other ones will give a report. But to give it to some WI to say, well, prove how many of diversity, this, that and another, just becomes a bureaucratic nightmare. And that's the problem with that Labour attitude.
Sorry, can I just say that also one of the key things we looked at was, did it benefit disabled people? So, for instance, Great Harwood Bowling Club are trying to improve facilities for disabled people who use the club. We gave them £1,000, but we also directed them towards the disability champion at Lancashire County Council to give them that extra support, and they've taken up that opportunity.
I'm pleased to hear that in the sort of operational rationale of all this, was consideration of allocating funds which would benefit young people, older people, and you just mentioned, Councillor Brickliff, disabled people. Was this made clear to the people who were putting in the bids?
I think that's a nonsense question, to be honest, because we invited organisations, we invited councillors to inform organisations in their wards whether to put in for it, and we didn't have any preconceptions as to who should be given the grants or not.
Was that a mistake?
No, definitely not. And as I say, you know, it's all right you calling it in and delaying the amounts that have been paid to these organisations, but really, you should question, would you have been in a position to give these grants out? Because as far as I'm concerned, you never ever did.
I think, Mr. Dan, did you want to ask a question?
Well, that's just kind of touched on it there. I think it's quite clear that there wasn't a predetermined kind of priority set in stone. So it's been opened, and there's been an abundance of applications, some of them quite niche, some of them high and wide. And then it seems like there's no fixed criteria. It's been a decision by two people in a working group to make a decision as to what their personal judgment is.
It had to be approved by cabinet.
Yeah. But had there been a priorities and a certain couple of priorities happen, you know, older young people maybe, and that been communicated to the groups, would that have made the process easier? Because I'm looking, this was an 8-month process. I know we're mentioning a delay now because of calling, but if the process had been communicated from the outset, perhaps the people on scrutiny might not have felt the need to call this in and challenge them.
I don't think there was any need to call this in. All you've done is delay monies that would be awarded to community groups throughout Ireland. It was done very fairly. You know, we looked at 83 applications, and 83 applications we requested about £330,000. So when you're dealing with that, the fact that we've managed to give grants to 50 organisations, I think, as I say, we should be complimented on, not chided.
Can I just make one observation? That if you had a look at the application form to complete it, it did have some criteria on there, and for anybody, it was really inclusive for everybody to apply, for any group to apply, and it did set some criteria out, and it did sort of give you some suggestions on how to complete it. So if you had a copy of that, you would be able to review what we had to apply for, so it met the criteria for the grant. So it was quite easy to understand for a lot of organisations.
Yeah, I suppose the question is, was it overly inclusive? If you've got a limited pot of money, you need to accept priority order.
Yeah, I agree. It did have some criteria on, and you had to meet that criteria, and I think it was very inclusive for our community.
I mean, I don't think you can be over-inclusive, although I do realise it's a concept people on that side may find difficult to understand. But you can't be more, you've got to embrace all of the community, not just part of the community.
I think for me, initially when the £5,000 award came up, it was a great idea because, you know, poor wards, especially like Peel, you know, we very rarely get money to it. We kind of raise our own, and it was a great idea, and I thought it was great. When it has been changed, I'll be honest with you, it makes sense to me. That is cost ward. You know, Peel got £1,800 You know, in Peel, we don't have many organisations, charitable organisations, but however, Barnfield, for example, you know, wherever, a lot of our residents do use those organisations, so it is cross. And I think it's good for a council to look at it and say, wait a minute, can we do this better? What comes along? When they come in and they make that decision and say, no, it's easier to make a political point by just continuing with something that's wrong. And actually it's quite brave to turn around and say, wait a minute, we can do this better. And I think that's what's happened. And you know, it's not for me to, because it's a different political group, to turn around and say, well, you know, that's wrong. It's for the sake of saying it's wrong. Because it was the right decision. I think it was a good decision, you know. We used to say in the army, test and adjust, always test and adjust. And I think that's what you did. So I welcome that. There's fantastic organisations in Hindburn, we should be very, very proud. Doing amazing work for pretty much nothing. You know, they don't get anything out of it other than helping people. I think we should be very, very proud of that. It's really great to see them get money for it.
Just a question around the money allocated. So going through all the figures, the majority of the projects didn't get the amount of cash that they asked for. So some of these bids were for specific projects. And so some organisations have been worried whether they'll be required, they might not be able to run that project because they haven't got the full amount of money. So do they have to pay that money back to the council, or refuse, or if it's not been paid to them, to say we're not going to take it because we can't run that project? Or is there going to be some sort of process where the council will say, well, yes, you need £4,000 to run the project, we've only given you 2, but we'll let you prioritise something else within your organisation. How's that going to work?
Well, in many instances, so for instance, Clayton Boxing Club had put in for £5,000. We actually contacted people and said, if we only give you 2, will you still be able to run with the project? And we were assured that they would welcome that. Enfield Cricket Club, for instance, wanted 3,500, I think. And it's not easy to just recall these, but we contacted Enfield Cricket Club, the chairman, and said, well, if we give you 2,350, would you still be able to they want to set up an online presence? And he said yes, and they would be very grateful for those monies. So we did try to address that problem. And you know, if any organisations feel that they can't carry on with the project, we will happily reallocate those monies.
Any other questions? We're ready to round up, I think. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for your input. You don't have to, obviously. I will now invite Councillor Scott Burt and Councillor Mike Booth as sponsors of the Calling to sum up if they wish.
I think we've learnt a lot from this exercise, and the fact that the framework was wrong. On a ward basis, it clearly didn't work. And what we've got, if you go through these allocations, is perhaps the most effective way of allocating that money. I mean, there are 1 or 2 here that I am involved in, and I see them as a priority. In future, I think maybe we could be a little bit clearer about what the borough is looking to do. The thing things like concentrating on young people. I mean, there's lots of areas there that could be improved, I'm sure. And, you know, there's one or two in there which I think people will be very disappointed that they didn't get an allocation, because, you know, that their need was quite great. And I think, you know, it's been useful, this calling. We've got a lot to learn when it comes to allocating taxpayers' money.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Whitcliffe, there's one who'd like to... Oh, sorry, did you want to...
No,
I thought that. Councillor Whitcliffe, if you'd like to sum up?
Well, as I say, as far as I can see, we really haven't learned very much from this calling. It's been about dither and delay, and I think that once again, the people who called it in have actually not recognised what was happening. I urge all councillors to release these decisions so these organisations can be paid as soon as possible.
I'd like to move that, Chair, if that's okay. I'd like to move that we release the Cabinet decision in full for implementation.
I think first we just go through the three different options.
Yeah.
Those are the options, but if you would like to. I think that's the obvious.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just go through the three different options.
Okay, Chair. So as a committee, you have three options, and I referred to this earlier in the meeting. They are outlined on page 15 of the agenda, and they are to release the Cabinet decision in full, which means that it can be implemented straight away. To release the Cabinet decision in part and refer the outstanding part of the decision back to Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out in writing the nature of the committee's concerns, or to refer the decision back to Cabinet in full, again setting out the nature of the committee's concerns. If we refer back to Cabinet anyway, Cabinet will consider our comments at the next meeting before making the final decision.
Thank you very much, Ben. From what I've heard,
My apologies for
If you like to do that.
I'd like to recommend that we release the Cabinet decision in full for implementation.
Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay, all those in favour? Against, if any? Straightforward. Thank you very much, Ben, to the committee members and the members of the public for coming today.